Thank you for being here. This is the first time that AARP has put together this type of an older voter issue forum, and that's because, one, we polled our members, and many of our members had said one of the things that they relish most about being an AARP member is the voter education, the chance for those voters to actually have direct access to candidates and the issues that are coming up in an election. So that's a benefit that AARP provides back to our members, but we also do it for anyone, because what we do for all. So this one today is titled Older Voters and the Election 2016. With 1.1 million members in North Carolina and about 100,000 of them right here in Wake County, one of our roles is to bring attention to these issues that are facing older voters and how the candidates are responding to those issues. Because older voters matter. Older voters, who will comprise about 1/4 of the voting population in this campaign season, they remain up for grabs and surprisingly have not been actively pursued by any candidate to date. Older voters are also highly experienced voters. They've been making choices on candidates dozens of times at the polls, yet millennials just a fraction of that. So today we will release the results of the North Carolina voter survey and will moderate a panel of diverse political viewpoints as they examine the issues that are important to the state's most active voters. We'll address the anxieties that voters feel, the wallet issues, and their views on potential solutions. And that makes this polling and today's forum different than most. We'll actually talk about what's on the minds of voters, ways to help address their concerns, and how the candidates for governor are responding to these. So let's start at the federal level. The next president. 72% of women voters in an AARP survey taken this past August want the next president and the Congress to take action now on Social Security. And so for 1/3 of voters 65 plus, Social Security represents at least 90% of their income. And this portion is likely to grow in the coming years as more and more retire without the savings or the pension to support them. And Social Security's future solvency is one solution preventing a new generation of poverty among people as they age. Yet in last night's debate, you'll notice not a single question or comment about Social Security from the two candidates. So to discuss these issues with us and respond to questions, I'd like for you to meet our panel. On my left, Mitch Kokai is Director of Communications for the John Locke Foundation. And the John Locke Foundation's represented over here at this table, and they provided some little handouts about some of the state budget issues. So that's from John Locke, not from AARP. Next at our table is Mr. Tommy Goldsmith. Tommy is currently a freelance writer, but he was the Wake County editor for the News and Observer, and he did a lot of writing on aging issues. So thank you very much, Tommy, for being here.
Glad to be here.
Next is Donna King. Donna is the managing editor of the North State Journal. Donna is also, we have the privilege of meeting her dad, Mr. Bob King, owns the Ace Hardware store down here in Raleigh. He's sitting at the table. So we're glad that the Kings are here, and thank you, Donna, for being on this panel.
Sure, thank you for having us.
And finally is Mr. Rob Schofield, the Policy Director of the North Carolina Policy Watch with the North Carolina Justice Center. So this represents a little bit of the left, a little bit of the right, and of course journalists who are there to kind of help us understand it all. So my first question to our panel: why should older voters vote for Mrs. Clinton or Mr. Trump when they've given so few details how they would change Social Security and then convince Congress to work together on a solution? Ladies first. Donna?
Sure, okay. So one of the things I think I found most interesting in this particular study was the list of items that the respondents found to be the most important and things that they would like to hear more information about. I think among them was balancing the state budget, which is was a big part of course, the agenda in the state, but also at the federal level. And then making sure that seniors are able to live more independently. Some of these long issues that are ongoing issues for many decades, I think that is why they should be looking at the candidates and really asking about financial security and about keeping the books clean and keeping the federal budget balanced.
Thank you. Mitch, your perspective?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to tell you to vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I think both Rob and I work for organizations that can't endorse any candidates, so we're not going to be telling you to vote for or against anyone in particular. But I think it is troubling for older voters that you haven't heard much from either of these major party candidates on an issue like Social Security reform that is such a major issue. And perhaps one of the reasons is that the last person who spent a lot of time really devoting a lot of attention to that was George W. Bush, who started his second term wanting to make this a major part of his program, and his proposals proved to be so unpopular that it really killed off a lot of his political capital. And then you had Katrina and everything else that contributed to the wars, everything else that contributed to the problems with his campaign, and the issue really hit the back burner. So I guess from a politician's perspective, it's not a surprise that neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump in a very hotly contested race would want to grab onto something that is so radioactive as Social Security reform. But we all know that someone's going to have to tackle this at some point. So I guess if you're making your decision, you would want to decide who you think would be most likely to, when the chips are down and something has to be done, will actually do something about it.
Thank you, Mitch. Rob?
Wow. Well, I guess first of all, I want to say that thank you for coming this morning. And I mean, as someone who himself is well into his AARP years, I think it's important to note right at the outset that the seniors I know, the AARP members I know, and speaking for myself, we're not making our decisions in the presidential election or the state election merely based upon self-interest or the issues that are only important to us. For the most part, the folks I know care about education, they care about tax policy, they care about the whole, they care about HB2, they care about the whole long list of issues that our public policy leaders and elected officials are dealing with in North Carolina and at the national level. That said, when it comes to issues like Social Security and overall financial security for seniors, I think it's clear that there's a consensus in the country that we need to hold on to Social Security, that we need to strengthen it, that we need intentional public solutions to solve these problems, that the notion that we can somehow turn it all over to the free market and we'll just sort of see how the chips land and let everybody plan for their own retirement has been discredited. That was why George Bush, as Mitch rightfully notes, his proposals along those lines were so unpopular. I think a renewed consensus is developing in the country that this notion of simply privatizing every public safety net program is a failed idea and one that we need not to pursue any further. And indeed, I think there's general consensus amongst the two presidential candidates on that issue. And when it comes to Social Security, I guess the only other point I would make is that it's true that down the road, if we do nothing, that there are issues for Social Security, but Social Security remains solvent at the present time. It will be for several decades to come, and with some fairly minor adjustments to the tax system and adjustments to recognize the fact that we have a population that's living longer, working longer, we can make Social Security easily work for another century without any radical changes. We can make minor tweaks to it and keep things going, indeed strengthen it so that it's a more effective part of providing economic security for seniors as our traditional things like pensions and IRAs become more fragile going forward.
Thank you, Rob. Tommy, if you would address our last issue on Social Security before we turn to state issues.
Yeah, I certainly would not give advice either on for whom someone should vote in this election. I did note that 51% of respondents were either very anxious or somewhat anxious about their having enough money to retire comfortably, so it's clearly on people's minds. The other thing I wanted to note is that we're really looking at 3 generations here. If we start at 45, as these pollsters did, you have millennials, or I'm sorry, Generation X or something of the sort, and then you have my generation, the greedy baby boomers, and then you have still millions and millions and millions of people over 75. My dad used to laugh at this, but the people whom the sociologists call the old, they're still very much with us, I'm glad to say, and vote in large numbers. So you have people whose retirement is pretty much fixed. They know how it's going to happen. You have people that are entering retirement, and then you have people like Donna for whom retirement is just a distant dream, and they may not be thinking about it that closely, so it may not figure into their calculations for voting.
Thank you, Tommy. So a couple times you've heard reference to a survey, and if you look around the room, there are some charts that show some questions from a survey. So here to talk about that survey, back in August, AARP did a survey, and it was led by our senior research advisor, Ms. Jennifer Sauer. So we have, Jennifer came in yesterday afternoon from Washington and here to tell you straight exactly what the researcher found. Jen, come forward.
So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Just a quick note, since we are live streaming on Facebook, you're going to hear me refer to slides. So there are no slides. So don't be looking everywhere around the room. But just so that you know, I'm referring to slides for our Facebook audience. So yes, as introduced, I am Jennifer Sauer, and I'm a senior research advisor for AARP in their state research division. And I've been with AARP for almost 18 years now in November. And it's literally sped by. I enjoy my job, and I really like the organization. This survey was primarily conducted in effort to gauge North Carolina registered voters ages 45 and older, their needs for information from gubernatorial candidates on select issues to help them make informed voting decisions. Oh, sure. Okay. Can you hear me better now? Is this better? Anybody have problems? Okay. Okay, let me see. I'll just lean in. Okay. So, yeah, to help them make informed voting decisions as they head to the polls in November. The interviews were conducted among registered voters that were obtained from a registered voter list. They were conducted in English by Precision Opinion, a public opinion research firm. They were conducted between August 18th and August 21st of this year. 20% of the interviews were done by cell phone and 80% were done by landline. The data were weighted back to registered voters ages 45 and older in North Carolina. And 1,000 surveys were completed for a margin of error of plus or minus 3.2%. While the survey explored opinions and concerns on a number of issues, some of which have already been discussed here, some Social Security, and also retirement and retirement aging, income, I'm just going to speak to two particular issues this morning. So to see responses to all of the questions, just refer to the annotated questionnaire in the packet that's on your table. So turning to slide 2, gubernatorial candidates beware. Our findings found that North Carolina voters might just do what they say they're going to do and turn up at the polls this November. In thinking about their past voting behavior when it comes to local elections, most, 77%, say they always voted, and another 1 in 5 say they vote most of the time. And nearly all, a whopping 97%, say that they plan to vote in this year's local elections. Among the number of issues tested in the survey as ones in which we wanted to gauge helpfulness in making a candidate decision, this is slide 3, health-related issues and retirement savings were a key focus, given their importance to AARP, as well as with federal, state, and local legislative issues, or agendas, excuse me. Our survey yielded at least 45% or more voters saying information on those issues would be very helpful. In fact, nearly 2/3 say it would be very helpful to have information on where a candidate stands on helping older adults live independently as possible and improving access to health care, including facilities, coverage, treatment, or providers. Another half or so would find information on a candidate's plan for providing help to unpaid caregivers helpful, and just over 2 in 5 would like to learn more about a candidate's plan regarding retirement savings options for those workers without an employer plan. Yet when asked if they received any information about these issues and where a candidate stands, since last January, over half say they have not. So we delved a little deeper into concerns about financial security and indeed found that half of both working and retired voters are either very or somewhat anxious in thinking about the future of their finances and the thought of living comfortable in their retirement years. We've asked this question in other state surveys, and honestly, there seems to be little variability. So in other states, workers and retirees seem to be just as anxious about their future financial well-being and retirement. And possibly behind this anxiety, we learned that at least half of all registered voters ages 45 and older in this state indicate they are worried about not saving enough, having to deal with an unexpected financial emergency, and not planning enough for retirement, with at least 1 in 5 saying they are very worried about each of these possible financial problems. And just over a third are worried about too much debt, while a quarter are worried about paying their bills. As are many states, North Carolina is considering legislation that would create a retirement savings plan for workers in the state who do not have access to an employer plan. And so we wanted to get a sense of how voters would think of this plan. Would they support or oppose it, with just understanding some of the basic features, such as its portability from job to job, not requiring taxpayer dollars, being professionally managed, and requiring low or minimal fees from both participants and employers. So after hearing this brief description, the data shows us that most would support a state-sponsored retirement savings plan, with just over 2 in 5 saying they would strongly support it. And quite coincidentally, the same proportion agree that elected officials should support this plan. Yet particularly interesting, or not, depending on how much media coverage the issue got or how much information dissemination has occurred over the past year, is that, again, most have not heard, seen, or read any information about where candidates stand on this particular issue. So next we dug a little bit deeper into unpaid caregiving in the state. How many say they are providing care to a loved one, and how many are feeling the weight of that job in terms of stress? About 1 in 5 registered voters ages 45 and older told us, after hearing our definition of an unpaid caregiver, that indeed they were providing care to a loved one. As many of us know, and some of us can imagine, providing the day-to-day care to a loved one that is required to keep them functional, healthy, and safe, it can be stressful. And our data shows that most caregivers feel emotionally stressed. I believe that 78% said they feel emotionally stressed. Nearly 2/3 are feeling stressed about balancing a family and a job, and many are financially strained or feeling a host of other stressors that weren't tested here. On slide 7, so it shouldn't be too surprising that most North Carolina registered voters think it's important that the state maintain home and community-based services that allow older residents to live as independently as possible in their homes and communities. In fact, we asked this question of importance to those who indicated they were not currently caring for a loved one because of past presumptions and opinions that, well, of course a caregiver is going to say those services are needed. What about the taxpayer who isn't caring for someone right now or might never provide the care? What do they think? Well, now we know what they think, and it is almost 2/3 say it's very important. So that's quite a whopping number there. Finally, as you can see on the slide, which you can't see, but I will tell you, most agree that elected officials in North Carolina should support legislation that maintains home and community-based services that help caregivers, with half of older registered voters saying they strongly agree with that statement. And again, as having read, heard, or seen any information about where a gubernatorial candidate stands on this issue, the majority of older voters say they have not read or heard or seen anything, and that's 89%. So essentially, to sum up this survey data, it seems clear that financial security in retirement is a worry and concern, both among workers and current retirees, and a state-sponsored retirement savings plan would be well received and supported. Likewise, legislation that helps maintain services that support unpaid caregivers would also be strongly supported. But older voters need more information on these issues and others in order to make well-informed voting decisions at the polls. And then my final slide is respondent demographics of the respondents. So for those of you that weren't able to see the slides here today, there are some poster boards with some of the findings, but if you contact me, I can send you the full deck of slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. So for our panelists, consider these insights about retirement savings that Jen just revealed. And then I'll add another poll that was taken in June by a centrist think tank called The Third Way, where they said that 78%, and by the way, that was nearly identical between those who identified as conservatives and those who identified as progressives. They agreed that there are, quote, bailouts for the top and handouts for the bottom, but nothing for those in the middle. So that reinforces this research, that people are anxious for something to address the financial anxieties of the working class, in particular as they prepare for retirement. So my question to you, given that there are now 18 states that are studying or have enacted creating a savings program so people can save for their retirement through a payroll deduction and become wealthier over time, and 3/4 of North Carolina voters are in favor of it, as from this survey, why aren't the two gubernatorial candidates proposing a way like this that would reduce people's financial anxiety? Who wants to start?
I'll give it a, well, go ahead, Mitch.
Go ahead, Rob.
I mean, I don't think that they're completely ignoring these issues. I think they're addressing it in generalities, but these are very specific issues that we need to keep bringing to their attention. It's great that AARP is having an event like this. It's great that you've asked them to speak out on these issues. You know, the candidates are especially our gubernatorial candidates, are charged with being experts on scores of issues, and to a certain extent, this is a fairly specific policy proposal. I think it's a good one, and it's one that quite likely could be considered in our state in the coming years. One thing I think that voters may need to look at when they're, assuming they're not going to get real specific proposals from the candidates on these issues, you look at other factors that serve as a proxy for what you think their position on these kinds of issues will be. Are they committed to public structures and public institutions and adequately funding our government and the core structures and services that hold a middle-class society together? Those are the things, unfortunately, I think you may have to look for rather than, you may not get the specific positions you want from Cooper and McCrory, for instance, on this very specific proposal about retirement. But there are proxies that you can look at and give you a pretty good inkling as to where they would come down. To me, this is a classic example of the kind of core public structure that we need to sort of knit together our society, to hold the middle class together, to boost it up. We need more things like this. And, I think you can divine from looking at the candidates' positions on lots of issues where they're likely to come down on proposals like this.
Thank you, Rob. Mitch?
My suspicion is an event like this is something that will help draw more attention to this particular issue. I found it very interesting that one of your first questions in the survey was how many people who are 45 and older plan to vote, and it was overwhelming. And any politician who doesn't know that older people vote probably should not be in the political business, because we all know that older voters vote. And so if this is a high priority for older voters, as defined here by 45 and older, then it is something that the politicians should be looking at, even if they haven't before. As to the specifics of the proposal, it'll probably be a case of the devil's in the details. I think you're going to find among the folks who are currently leading the General Assembly or in the administration on the executive side that putting together a new government program that would be run and administered by the governor and that would take, or by the government, and that would take a lot of taxpayer resources might be harder to get through than something that would give people another option, something that employers and the individual employees could sign up for, that would not necessarily say, hey, you have to do this, but hey, this is something instead that is an option for you. You haven't had this through your employer. The state's going to make this available as an option. I think that would have probably a lot of buy-in, as Rob also suggested. But I think your event, drawing attention to this, is probably going to be one of the main things that puts it on the radar screen for whoever's going to be in charge after the November election.
Great. Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, I think,
Donna?
I think actually speaking to what both of them said, that anybody running for governor overlooks the seniors' vote at their own risk. They turn out, they've got decades of experience. They've seen, this is not their first rodeo. They know what they're hearing when someone speaks. But I also think that to look at issues as a proxy, whether they would be supportive of a specific policy. You have to look at whether they are in favor of and taking action to promote an overall healthy economy. Are they interested in a balanced budget? Are they interested in lower taxes? Are they willing to make the investments in education and infrastructure and all of those things that are important to keep the state economy healthy? Do they want to make sure that more people are employed if they can be? Are they trying to, you know, rise all boats and then allow seniors to have more control over their income and keep more money in their pockets?
Thank you. Tommy?
One thing that strikes me about this proposal is that it's a sort of reverse privatization, because at one time many more people had defined benefit pensions. And that's something that I've never heard a candidate address, but it's had a huge effect. I mean, you had generations of people who worked at the same job for 30 years, and then they had, you know, with Social Security and a pretty nice little pension, they could do okay. During the last 3 decades, many, if not most, employers have abandoned defined benefit pensions in favor of 401ks, in favor of nothing. So this would be an instance of the state stepping in to fill a void that's been created by private industry or corporations as they sought to find ways to save money. But I do agree that it could be viewed with skepticism as a government program. I'm not going to give them my money. You know, they would lose it or, you know, do something bad with it. But I think that's a factor that perhaps has not been addressed widely enough, and a candidate might do that to his or her benefit.
Thank you. And for the record, 52% of working North Carolinians do not have access to a workplace savings vehicle through their employer. And most of those tend to be in small businesses and in some of the areas that have a high proportion of lower educated workers. So we'll turn to the third question. This is regards caregiving. So former First Lady Rosalind Carter said it first and said it best. There are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. So there are about 65 million people in the U.S. who care for loved ones who are older, chronically ill or disabled, or live with special needs or mental illness. We have about 1.9 million caregivers in North Carolina, and about 500,000 of them are estimated to be long-term caregivers, such as caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease. Anxiety among caregivers is rampant. 78% feel emotionally stressed, you know, from the survey that Jen just described. 63% are stressed from balancing job and family, and 44% feel that they are financially strained. So despite these stresses, the gubernatorial candidates are barely talking about their records supporting caregivers. So my question to this panel, and I'll start with Tommy, what advice would you give to the candidates to address these constant concerns by caregivers, mindful of Rosalind Carter's summary that everyone there are only 4 kinds of people, all of which are caregivers?
Sure. Well, one thing is, Donna talked about lifting all boats. I mean, more general prosperity would help the situations of people who are caregivers. Having said that, the people who need help from the government aren't always aware that the services are there. I think the candidates could talk about that. And then every year in the General Assembly, there's a fight about home and community-based services in the form of the block grant. But instead of saying that, the candidate can say that and be greeted with blank stares, or he or she could say, I'm talking about Meals on Wheels, I'm talking about a little help in your home once in a while with meds, a little help in your home once in a while with housekeeping, because you see here 86% of people say it's very important or somewhat important to remain at home. Overwhelmingly, people want to age in place. So talking about that, being able to say, I worked, you know, I talked to the leaders and we were able to get this amount of money up to where we don't have more than 10,000 people on waiting lists for home and community care based services. People often don't connect the realities of their lives with what they see or hear. And so I would say to a candidate, bridge that gap. You know, say, I'm going to make it possible for adult daycare, I believe, is a block grant funded service. A lot of people don't even know there is such a thing as adult daycare. Now we have adult daycare with overnight respite, just passed with little notice in the General Assembly. So these are things that really make a difference. I'm going to go in just one more second if you don't mind, but if I'm at home as a 64-year-old, and my parents have both died, I'm sorry to say, but if one of them were there, perhaps going to adult daycare during the day so my wife and I can work, you know, a real luxury would be able to go out of town for a weekend. I mean, people who are caregivers would rarely be able to do that. So if you have adult daycare with overnight respite, that's a game changer. That can save a marriage or save, you know, the health of the older person.
Thank you, Tommy. Rob.
I completely agree with what Tommy said. I guess there are 3 points I wanted to make on this issue. It's one I'm very passionate about. Number one, when I leave here today, I'm going to go see my octogenarian mom who ordered a washer from Sears, and it's got like a touchpad on it. The thing, she couldn't make it work. And they've sort of been treating her like, oh, the old lady doesn't know how to use a touchpad. Well, I went over there this weekend. It doesn't work. The thing's broken. They've replaced it once. I'm going to spend the afternoon convincing this repair guy that it's not because my mom's 84 that the washer doesn't work. And this is the kind of basic, simple care people need. And they do want to stay in their homes. And a classic example of how we make this absurdly difficult in our state and our society is because we disinvest, we cut taxes for the top 1%, and then we disinvest in things like home and community care. We have a system, there's a fact sheet on your table, I hope you'll take a look at it, about quality pay for quality care in North Carolina. It's an important issue, not just unpaid caregivers, but we have paid caregivers out there who, because of our disinvestment in public structures and in Medicaid and systems like that, not putting enough money into them, these people can't earn a living. These people aren't earning a living wage. They can't stay with the people they want to stay with to help. They have to work multiple jobs. These workers don't have paid days off. They're trying to juggle their own crazy lives. I mean, it's symbolic of our disinvestment in core public structures that ought to just be taken as a given in 21st century America. So I think that's the 3 main points I want to leave you with on that, is that there are a lot of real compelling stories out there. I'm living it every day with my mom and my father-in-law who's got Alzheimer's. We need to vastly increase our commitment to this critical area, especially as our population ages. It's just silly to think that we're going to be able to continue to go along as we have without providing the resources that are necessary to do this critically important work.
Thank you, Rob. Mitch?
I would think the key thing for the caregivers is to be vocal about what the needs are. I mean, to respond to Rob on talking about the tax cuts, I mean, the tax cuts help lead to more economic prosperity, which is helping a lot of the families get the resources they need to deal with caregiving. But I think one of the problems we've seen with Medicaid that has only been recently, I don't know if I would say resolved, but at least set in its place for a while, is that there were so many things going on in Medicaid that were out of control in North Carolina that the program was running way over budget year after year after year and eating into other state government priorities. Well, now it seems over the past couple of years that funding for Medicaid is back sort of in a predictable place, which has meant that money that was supposed to go to education and other items could still go to those items. Medicaid is getting the funding that it's supposed to get. Now is a good time that problem has been, if not corrected, at least stabilized, to look at what Medicaid and other health and human services programs are funding and see if the priorities are right. I mean, are we paying for the things that people really need? And it sounds as if the caregivers who are surveyed in here are saying, look, some of these things that we need, we're not getting. So perhaps there are some other things that we are paying for that are less needed, and that probably needs to be a conversation that takes place regardless of what you think about tax rates and other things that Rob and I are going to disagree about over and over again.
Thank you, Mitch. And Donna, bring us to the end of this question.
Sure. I think one thing that we should also look at is that we have about 10% of our population in North Carolina is under 65 with a disability. So we actually have a lot of caregivers who are more in my generation. We've got aging parents, we've got siblings or children that may or may not have a disability. We're taking care on both sides. And I thought it was interesting in this survey that sometimes the questioner had to explain what a caregiver was, because we don't even really realize that we're providing that level of care to the people in our lives. So I think that also goes to communication and having events like this and making sure that AARP is, talking to legislators and telling them about the caregiver crisis in North Carolina, because I think you're not going to find help for that through some of these traditional institutions. Maybe what it really requires is a lot of communication and working together and finding some sort of innovative solution that goes across the age spectrum, to people in their 30s and 40s, all the way through the spouses that are having to care for people who are disabled.
Thank you, Donna. So now's the time where we open it to the floor for you to ask questions to our panel. We have this research that are on these charts that are around. If you have a question about the research, we also have our researcher, Jen Sauer, who's available to address those. So I'll open it up. First question coming from... Sir, and because we only have microphones up here, I'll repeat your question.
Well, my question goes to the panel and also to the researcher. You make mention that people who are middle income that are not under a retirement system per se from the employer, I think you forgot to say that everybody who works in this country has to pay Social Security of some sort. So there is a retirement system, but it's inadequate. Most adequate, totally inadequate. But my concern is, why doesn't if this go on, why don't you have a savings account? I know I taught school for 25 years, and I find that the public school system doesn't teach the basic financial responsibility that all the students. They say, go get a job, but they don't say, wait a minute, are you putting anything back for your own savings? I think that's one of the concerns that I like to see addressed, is how do we address the public school issue that kids coming out of school, even college, they get a nice big debt, but they don't get to, well, how much are you saving? So my question is there any way that we can address that through AARP, that the generation coming into the system doesn't understand that they have to be able to save for the future?
So for the purposes of those who are online, the question regards financial education and training, for students as they were to enter the workforce, and emphasizing the need for savings for retirement at an early age. So panel, there was a bill that was in this past legislature to introduce financial education in the schools. I can't recall the exact status of that bill, but would you like to, who's up on it?
I want to speak to that because that's something I've worked on. Before I went to work at NC Policy Watch, ncpolicywatch.com if you want to check us out, I was a lobbyist for consumers at the legislature. I worked with AARP on a lot of these issues on predatory lenders, payday lenders, who take advantage of unsophisticated borrowers. And that's clearly a critically important issue. We need to lift up, we need to educate our students, our adults, our seniors about the dangers of being preyed upon by predators, and about the importance of saving for retirement and being better stewards of their own financial resources. But the hard truth that we have to always keep in mind is that it only goes so far. I'm an attorney by training, a consumer rights attorney. I can't decipher half of these contracts they ask you to sign with these complicated financial transactions people are involved with these days. There's no way that the average person can be an island unto themselves and simply take care of all this, and with a little education in high school, I'll save for retirement and everything will be fine. Sure, we want to promote self-sufficiency, but we also need to recognize that we need basic public structures. We need consumer protection laws to protect people from being preyed upon by shady investors as well as lenders. And we need public structures like Social Security and programs like the AARP is promoting here in North Carolina to provide an easy-to-use vehicle that average people can access without having to have a PhD in economics or high finance. It just ought to be a basic component of a civilized society that we don't force every individual to have to spend 20% of their time poring over their investments in order to have a pleasant retirement.
But I do think that there's a fundamental difference in this generation and previous generations in the understanding of debt and how it works. I think that, some of that really is a part of the problem at the government level, but also at the family level. I think that we have grown up, my generation has grown up in a time of credit cards and all these other things that we really never understood, and it hasn't been enforced what debt does to an organization, a company, a government, or a family.
Thank you. Mitch?
I wanted to latch on to one piece of the question that I thought was very interesting, and I think the questioner was suggesting that it might be within the purview of AARP to get involved with this, which is an interesting thought because we think of AARP working almost exclusively with older folks, but everyone's eventually going to end up being someone that you're going to want to work with, and the idea of partnering with other groups that are interested in financial literacy and trying to get some programs in place so that people early in their lives know how Social Security works, what kind of impact it's going to have on your retirement, what other things you need to be doing, especially if you're pushing the legislation that would allow for a state savings account. You could tell them, well, this is what this program would do. This is what has been available in terms of 401ks. I think all of that would be helpful. And the other piece of it is that financial literacy in general is going to improve almost everything we do because it'll make people better informed as they cast their votes on other issues. Sure, you're in support of education, so don't you want those education dollars to be spent as wisely as possible? Sure, you want to have a good health and human services program, so those dollars have to be spent as well as they can be because it's money coming out of your pocket that you might be able to pay for your kids, for your own retirement, for the caregiving work that you're doing. All of those things are improved if people's financial literacy is in better shape.
Thank you. Tommy?
Yes, excuse me. As my boys reached college age, we got hundreds and hundreds of solicitations for credit cards for them, and I just threw them away before the boys ever saw them. And in fact, we had so scared my older son about credit cards, he had to get one, buy some stuff, and pay it off before he could get a loan for a car because he had no established credit. But that's not to say we've done very well with him. We taught him, we gave ourselves as an example. But to answer the question more directly, I think social media, it would be a much more effective tool than a course in high school. I mean, you would have to elect to take it in a high school, but if you had a social media campaign that said, what have you got on your credit card? Can you really pay for that? You know, how long is it going to take you? Because there are traps or hidden bits of language everywhere that can really get you in trouble. And I'm going to plug my own work briefly. I wrote a story, I think it's online now, about Medicare Advantage. If you're insured and are 64, you can get a notice from your insurance company that says, oh, by the way, you're not going into traditional Medicare. We're transferring you into Medicare Advantage, and I won't go all into Medicare Advantage, but it's a private Medicare that is very good for some people and really not good for others. So the message, the moral there is, read your stuff. But I really think that making like an anti-smoking campaign, making an anti-debt campaign would be a smart thing to do because you can't avoid it when you're young. You just don't go out or you don't buy this or that. I used to think of it, would I go to my friend and say, can I have $100 to go out to dinner, at a really nice restaurant with my girlfriend? I would never do that, and the person wouldn't lend it to me anyway, but I might put it on my credit card.
Great, thank you. And for the record, those 18 states that have either enacted or are studying this type of a savings program include financial literacy components as part of that legislation. So I think that was a great question. Let's go with Margaret Toman, and then Sir, and then Mary Bethel. Margaret?
I am financially literate, and I had a good nest egg built up for my own retirement. And my mother began to fall into wander during my latter working years. I spent 16 years taking care of her at home. We had adult Medicare, which was a godsend. But I lost my job in the recession, and things became very, very difficult. If you
Thank you, Margaret. Margaret, do you have was there a question in there? Or?
Just, well, I broached this at another group one time here. I thought, what about introducing the possibility of just a small stipend for people like me who are doing it alone? I'm the only family member, no other family support. I mean, a little something each month I could have bought maybe for nutritional drinks or some cotton supply, but something to keep me from going down the hole. That's been a fortune over the past 16 years.
Thank you. So, question is, in terms of family caregivers who spend through their savings in order to take care of a loved one, is actually, it's a common issue. It's something that when our Alzheimer's Task Force presented to the state legislature its report this past spring, Dr. Lene Smith, the widow of Dean Smith, she spoke quite eloquently about the Smith family's fortunes being spent to take care of Coach Smith. And also recently heard from a gentleman who had quite a large amount of money who told me that he spent over $1 million taking care of his mom. So these, of course, most people don't have those kinds of assets. The Veterans Administration provides a stipend for our wounded warriors. For paid family caregiving. The state of Massachusetts, I'm not sure if they've enacted, but has a study on this. So is this something that North Carolina should consider, some sort of stipend for people that meet certain financial eligibilities? Your thoughts on that, Mitch?
I would suggest that the way that something like this would be most likely to happen is if legislators heard from someone like you. I mean, my guess is Rob and his organization would push very hard for something like this, but if lawmakers are hearing from a guy in a suit who's telling them, well, this and this, and they're not going to respond the same way as they are to the person who's actually gone through it. And so some sort of coordinated campaign that involved people who had similar stories, who could actually share them with legislators. I mean, these aren't hard-hearted people. They do have to make decisions about, am I going to spend X amount on this, Y amount on this? But when they hear individual stories and they hear some concrete proposals that might be a possibility, they are going to respond. Would you get exactly what you want? Who knows? But certainly they are amenable to hearing these stories and trying to come up with something that can work for people and allow the state to live within its means.
Donna?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think what we really are is seeing the caregiver crisis, and it's only going to get worse. I think as we, our state has a large aging population, pretty soon we're going to have more people over 60 than under 18. And this is something that I think I would echo exactly what Mitch says. They need to hear from you. They need to know. They're raising children and taking care of parents also, and they're doing it while they're on the road. So this is a group, I think, that would be open to hearing your story.
Thank you.
I actually don't think they are. I don't think that the people that are currently running the state of North Carolina are open to that message. I don't think they're interested in enacting programs like that. I think if we had not taken the steps back that we've taken in the last 5 years, which are documented in this report that's over there on the counter, I hope you'll pick up a copy if you haven't seen it already, or go to ncpolicywatch.com. These are the kinds of things we'd be on the verge perhaps of enacting in North Carolina. But unfortunately, after 5 years of basically taking a wrecking ball to government and decimating myriad social programs, we're now at the position where the best case scenario in 2017 is we begin to repair some of the damage that's taken place the last 5 years. I think that Margaret's idea is a tremendous one, but I don't think the current leadership of this state is interested at all in something like that, and I don't think that they are the kind of people who've been listening to average folks telling their troubles and their practical everyday problems like that. They're much more interested in this notion of trickle-down economics, or we just cut taxes on people at the top, then it'll all sort of work out. Unfortunately, we've had a retreat from commitment to these kinds of public structures and systems, and I'm not optimistic that something like that will happen anytime real soon.
They almost took daycare away from us in 2000.
I know that.
Thank you, Rob. Donna?
Well, I would only note that, oh, I'm sorry.
No, please, go right ahead.
I thought you.
No, I did. Go right ahead.
I would only note that the constituency for this sort of thing would be the same as the constituency for the block grants, home community care block grants, and there's a fight every year to keep those from being cut. So I'm not sure that I would be surprised if Margaret has not been downtown. I know a number of people who have and testified about situations of this sort, so I'm not convinced that that alone would make the difference. It's you know, the block grants and Medicaid kind of all come under the same effort to help people in these sorts of situations, and adding to that piece of the pie, as Mitch has indicated, is not something that's really on the agenda. It might be a matter of moving money around, but as far as giving cash stipends, I think it does occur in some states. It would take some changes to make that occur in North Carolina, in my belief.
And they are getting ready to go through this. We're really on the verge of a full Medicaid reform. They've been meeting throughout the summer and through last session to really talk about it, because they've been dealing with, of course, as we know, a Medicaid crisis in the state. So this is the opportunity to go and make sure that that's heard as they go through this reform process.
Okay, Donna, you had a second shot, and Rob's just
Sure, please, go right
bated
ahead.
breath.
Well, I would only say that I disagree with the premise that there's been a Medicaid crisis in the state. The crisis has been, again, the disinvestment in this program, the abandonment of, the attempt to abandon community care of North Carolina, which is an award-winning public program that has provided Medicaid services in this state. And the attempt right now is to privatize Medicaid. It's the same thing we've been hearing in area after area, that we're going to disinvest, disconnect from public structures, common good structures that work for everybody, and we're going to try to solve the problems of state government by bringing in the profit motive. We're going to bring in giant Wall Street-based companies to run Medicaid instead of having homegrown nonprofit run it. And I don't actually think that the federal government, especially if Hillary Clinton is elected, is going to approve the Medicaid privatization plan that's being proposed in North Carolina. But the notion that we're somehow moving forward to address the kind of problems that Margaret has been raising so eloquently, I'm not nearly as optimistic, at least in the near term.
And for the record, both Governor McCrory and Attorney General Cooper have spoken to AARP about the financial toil that caregivers go through and the need for new solutions. Now, how that is done, as Mitch said long before, the devil's in the details. Sir.
Basically, when you go to the General Assembly and say, well, here's the new program, the first two questions you're going to get is how much is it going to cost and how are we going to pay for it? Have those questions been addressed?
About this type of a stipend?
Yes. About the professionally managed state retirement savings program.
That was introduced in 2015. The bill didn't move forward, mostly just because of inactivity regarding other bills.
My question was there any calculation as to the projected cost of implementing and maintaining such a program? And was there any suggestion as to how that cost could be met?
The legislature has not had that discussion, although we have that research that shows what the cost would be and what the 5-year and 15-year savings to the state would be. But
What are those numbers?
the short answer is that the savings to the state, North Carolina, in the first 5 years is $17 million in savings to the Medicaid program. And then to extrapolate that further into 15 years, we're now negotiating a contract with the university to calculate it over a 15-year period. So I think by December or January, that research will be available from the UNC system. Okay. Mary Bethel?
Thanks to the panelists today on having this. You know, we're getting close to the election, and we've talked several times about having forums like this and also put issues like this on the radar screen. But it's getting real close to elections, and you know, after elections, we've got work to do too. There have been several references made to the fact it's really hard to get traction on aging issues. So if we're going to try to raise the bar, get aging on the table more, not part of the menu, but get it on the table. What can we do other than do forums like this to try to elevate the issue?
So the question for our online audience is how can we elevate the issue of aging, our aging population, to our policymakers? So we'll start with our boomer at the table, Tommy Goldsmith.
I'm not sure I'm the only one, but
You're not.
as Mary knows very well, at one time, I called myself the generations reporter so that I wouldn't be the aging reporter, which was painfully clear anyway. That's a tough one because if you look at the frequency of voting, it's the highest frequency of voting among any demographic group, yet older people are, for a large part, or to a large extent, taken for granted, I think, by the major candidates. They may have, I'm sure Hillary Clinton has a page in her platform that talks about these issues, and it probably sounds great, but people tend to remain in their voting patterns, or that has been the historical pattern. I think that unless very specific issues were brought to the public attention that affect older people, that habit will continue. So, you know, I will speak up for newspapers and other major media that it's the job of media to bring those issues to the forefront, but it's also the job of advocacy organizations to make their presence felt. I will briefly recount an incident in which the now famous Robert Pittenger was at the General Assembly and had presented a bill to change the age at which people were required to be tested more often for driving. He was there one day, and it was doing okay in the committee, and they had to have a second vote on it, and Mary Bethel and her vast network of co-conspirators got busy, and I wrote a story that ran in the paper that was entirely objective, of course, and the next day they had probably 120 people in the committee room. One of Pittenger's Republican colleagues introduced an amendment that basically cut the heart out of the bill. It failed. Everyone moved on. I had never seen a more startled-looking person than Representative Pittenger. But in these sorts of local situations with very sharp edges, I think older people can be mobilized, can get in motion, and the question is, how do you make that? I mean, I think older voters to some degree have been manipulated by the parties when they talk about cuts in Medicare or cuts in Social Security without really defining what they are. But getting accurate information out there and making clear its impact would be the way to get people in motion.
Great, thank you. And by the way, AARP does have a driver safety program had Representative Pittenger's bill move forward. Before we go back to the audience, any other comments about raising aging more prominently?
I would just say that you have this fabulous staff at AARP, and you need to expand it. You need, you take some more resources so you can have some more lobbyists and some more lawyers and people over there to raise heck.
I think social media, though, has played a large role in this, because I think even politicians, you know, and lawmakers, they are focusing on social media like many of us are, and they're in a response mode to those. But the average age of a newspaper reader, a paper newspaper reader, is about 57. So I think because their day-to-day response is what they see on Facebook and Twitter and all those things, they tend to overlook and take for granted the older voter who is looking at things in a little more depth. They're actually opening the newspaper, they're spending time, they're writing letters, and they're engaged in social media, but I think our legislators aren't seeing their footprint in it as much as they are other issues.
Good point. Mitch?
And remember that whatever you think about them individually, whether you like them or dislike them, politicians follow what they think is going to get them votes. If they don't think that these issues are really going to matter in terms of votes, then they're going to pay less attention to them than the issues that are. So if these are your priority issues and you're only going to vote for this person if he or she follows through on them, then you got to actually make that be true and not just say it.
Thank you. One last question, Bill Burchett.
There's a myriad of problems that we're working on that need to be worked on. But this is an opinion instead of a question. Until we get the gerrymandering problem solved, I don't think any of these issues are going to be solved. Because when you elect a representative or a congressman from
So the issue of how our legislative districts are drawn comes up quite frequently, and there's always two sides to that story. Mitch, do you want to go first?
Well, oddly enough, although you probably surmised that Rob and I disagree on many, many things, both of our organizations are part of a coalition that is working to reform the way the election maps are drawn in North Carolina and would like to take it out of the hands of the politicians so that they don't choose their own voters and actually put it back into the hands of the voters by setting up some form of independent commission. Now, once again, the devil is in the details, because you could either set up, as some legislation has described, an independent commission, or you could put it into the hands of professional staff members at the General Assembly who would be barred from dealing with any legislators as they're putting their plans together. But basically, the key to the process is put some rules in place that will bind whoever draws the maps and stops them from putting things into consideration, like where the incumbents live and how people have voted in previous elections. Those of you who are following this very closely have probably seen that the former UNC system president, Tom Ross, who's now over at the Sanford Center at Duke, led a group of bipartisan former North Carolina judges that came up with their own election maps that look better than this squiggly, crazy 12th district and other districts that date really back to the 1990s, back when Democrats were doing the gerrymandering, and now Republicans are doing the gerrymandering. So I think in this case, this may be one issue where Rob and I would agree that the process needs to change, take it out of the politicians' hands, put it back into the people's hands, or at least make it more likely that it will be in the people's hands.
Yeah, I
And
do
Rob,
agree.
And if you would add into the context that we're about 3 years away from the next redistricting, 4 years from the next redistricting.
Well, that's right. We're going to have to redistrict again. It's done based on the census, of course, every 10 years. And so we may have to redistrict even by court order even before that, because there are court challenges to the maps that we have that are scandalously gerrymandered. And your question is right on the money. It gets to the heart of so many of the issues we care about. There's pretty much just about anything that could be come up with a commission that Tom Ross leads or that anybody leads would be better than what we have right now. And unfortunately, and I understand how the game works, that it's really tough to give up power once you finally obtain it. But the sort of sad irony of all this is that the people who were championing, people like Phil Berger, who were sponsoring legislation to have an independent redistricting commission when they were in the minority, all of a sudden lost interest when they got in the majority. And I understand how that works, and there was gerrymandering going on when the Democrats were in control too, but it's really been taken to a new level of perfection in recent years, and it's a critical problem that we have to address, or you're right, we're not going to get after any of these other problems very effectively.
Donna?
Sure, I think the real challenge is going to be what is that independent commission, and how are they going to be selected, and how will their work be conducted? That's the big challenge that they're facing now.
Tommy, you get to wrap.
I don't have anything really to add. I've been following this, but it's pretty much been told.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first public forum that AARP in North Carolina has put on, at least for many, many years. I want to thank you for being a part of it, and also wanted to point out that if you'd like to have more information about how the gubernatorial candidates stand on some of these issues, you can visit the video voter guide. That's where we interviewed both Attorney General Cooper and Governor McCrory and asked them about these questions, and they gave their responses. That's on video. You can go to that at aarp.org/NC. There's a video voter guide that's there. You can click on it, or you can find it on our Facebook. That's facebook.com/AARPNC. And also wanted to remind that AARP does not endorse any candidate, nor do we have a political action committee that provides any type of a funding or support for any of these candidates. Our role is really about helping people understand what those issues are and how the candidates will respond to them. Margaret, do you want to see any?
It's what Rob talked about when I first walked in here. He talked about his 80-year-old mother who tried to get her washing machine fixed. She was assumed to be the maker, not the washing machine. I think we need to get our older folks out in the public arena more so that people get used to being around us again like in the old days. We have dementia-friendly communities coming up. I think we need age-friendly cultural training coming up. I think if you have old people in
Well, I will make a plug there. She said dementia-friendly and age-friendly, and I was proud to serve with Mary Bethel and some others on the North Carolina Task Force on Alzheimer's, and our state is one of a handful of states that is moving forward quickly on becoming a dementia-capable, dementia-friendly state. And I'll point out, if Commissioner Sig Hutchinson from Wake County is still here, Wake County became the most populous county in the state to join the network of age-friendly communities earlier this month, followed quickly by Mecklenburg County. And of course, Orange County likes to always say they're first. They were the first county. So all that's happening quickly. Thank you very much, and thanks to our panel for coming out and spending the morning with us. Thank you.
I hope the school year goes great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yours too. Are they still in school?
Maybe I'll see you out there at the events this weekend.
Yeah, right.